Hi, everyone. I'm really excited for this episode of Branching Out. I get to chat with Sameer Modha, a great friend, also the measurement innovation lead over at ITV. We knew each other and met each other back during our Google days. Back then, he was head of applied data science at Google, but Sameer's really had a ton of influence on the entire ad and marketing industry, as well as the analytics and measurement industry. He's written for Marketing Week, Media Leader. He's done talks at various industry conferences. He's got a long background and he's just a super pleasure to talk to. So, really looking forward to sharing this conversation with you all. And as you'll see, we'll probably need to do it again sometime really soon. Thank you so much, Sameer.
Welcome to Branching Out by Bonsai, the podcast where marketing gets measured, myths get busted, and acronyms get explained. No filler, just the good stuff. Let's get into it.
So there's a bit that what it's like when you're interviewing or hiring. You usually end up having to do a bit about you.
Yeah.
I always end up doing the same story now, which has evolved over time. But broadly, I suppose I started out working on the kind of strategy side of things. Some people call that account planning. Typically, it's the bit where you like thinking about where the business problem meets the consumer behavior. The business may want to sell a whole truckload of widgets, but what's the widget market like and how is that brand perceived and all those sorts of things. And I've always found that fascinating. And so I did that in lots of different kinds of agency, creative agencies, digital, direct marketing agencies. I think the only one I haven't done formally was PR. That was just a secondment. But other than that, but always doing the same role, just curious about the business challenge and then what do we know about the people. And I suppose over that time, I suspect like you encounter two classes of misuse or failure of data and analysis. And the first is the one where the data people rock up with some kind of analysis and it is indescribably boring. Yeah, it's true but useless. My favorite one, that you get these sorts of data scientists who are just learning the trade, if you like, and they're okay, I can now geocode tweets or something. Or we can't call them tweets now, can we? And then they'll plot them all on a map. You go, look, I've discovered this thing. And you go, yeah, that's Paris. We knew about Paris. Well done for learning the tech, but no, we didn't need you to tell us about Paris. And you get these sorts of things where because they're too far removed from the domain of the advertiser, say, or whatever, they don't have that filter of, there are the basic things that we know. Now, what's the weird stuff? What's the sort of unusual stuff that might cause us to do strategy differently? But then so that's true but dull. And then you get the really nasty one, I think, which is the false but interesting. And this is and look, we've all done it. I'm not proud. I too have picked one number and gone, yeah, okay, so we should totally change the strategy of what we're doing. All because of this one number. At which point someone else comes along and goes, hang on a minute, isn't that number the same for all the brands in the category?
Yeah.
So why would we do anything differently? That's just normal, isn't it? And those are bad as well. Usually they get rumbled at some point, but sometimes it can be years later, and that's dangerous. And so I ended up moving more towards data teams and data science teams, just because I wanted to get stuff that would have been interesting and useful for me with my strategy hat on, but that was also true and rigorous. So useful truths for marketers. If I had a slogan or t-shirts, that would be on the t-shirts. They'd be very boring t-shirts, but that's where I'm headed.
I think they'd be wonderful t-shirts. I love those 2 points. It's funny you mentioned those numbers you can share that are true but also telling a lie. I think a lot of people who don't have the data background, what they might not know is business or marketing. It's a system. It's an ecosystem. It's alive, and these things are generally speaking dynamic. And so there's usually two things you have to look at, and they're not like complicated a lot of times. It's like ROI and volume, or it's population and whatever. And these are pretty intuitive. It's not super complicated, but you can almost always tell if someone's telling a lie with a truth if they share one number. One number, when truth is basically defined by an interplay and you pick a number, you're hiding another number, right? And so
No, that's very true.
And then I love that part about the sharing the dull information. I'm sure you do too. I try to pick nicer words for like when I'm giving feedback on, hey, you're sharing a bunch of trivia. It's exactly how I feel. The reaction is just, and
Yeah.
I think, but I try to be nice, but I do try to share my passion for why not to do that though. Cause I feel like that's the other thing. I've not had all the same experiences you've had, although we've shared a few in our careers. But when you're talking to people who really know the business or run the business, but maybe didn't come from the quantitative side, I feel like that's like the one thing that undermines a new analyst or very smart like data resource is if they lead with sharing something trivial. The people who don't know that they're really smart are immediately skeptical. You talk
Yeah.
about Paris. It's because they understand. They're like, wait a second, does this person not understand this element? And then they're like, what else don't they understand? And then the whole thing is you're fighting up this hill of credibility. And so I love it. I love emphasizing you got to share the truth. It's got to be useful. Feel free not to say anything until you've thought about those things.
And it weirdly it relates, I think, to the sort of the problem of how you structure data teams in relation to a business. And I really want to write something on this. It might end up being a skit, but years ago there was a chap called Jeremy Bullmore who is quite famous in the advertising world, and he did this sort of skit about. I think it was. I can't remember if it was titled. I think it was called "How to Treat Your Agency." But the way he did it was he flipped everything, so it was how not to treat your agency. And there was all the brief them at the last minute, all these sorts of things. And I think one for data people would be quite good. Leave things till the last minute because they really don't like having too much time. Don't give them any context because they'd rather just work in a vacuum. And it's fine to say, "Can I have a run for this?" rather than explain what you're trying to achieve. And there are those sorts of things. And it often happens where you've got the data resource centralized and then matrixed across. And it makes sense when people do that because they all go, "Oh, we have to have career ladders and we have to have ways of," you and I lived through this at Google with the analytical consultants, or I can't remember what the US called them, it was slightly different, wasn't it? Do they ladder up through the sales people or do they have a separate reporting structure? Oh, but the salespeople have to tell them what to do, so they should report to them. But then maybe we should give them a ladder or something. And people tend to go towards the sort of laddered approach because then it's easier in some ways to retain people like that. But I think it's a mistake because the people that you're working with never feel like you're with them. They just feel like you're a bystander almost. My team at ITV is what you might describe, I've nicked this from Adam Heimlich, I think, is a forward deployed data science team.
Yeah.
So we sit in the sales org, we have the same bonus structures, we report up through the sales org, but within that we have a slightly more humane approach where the data people and the team are reporting to me.
Yeah.
And I know how to look after them in a way that maybe an out and out salesperson wouldn't. And that then means that they are bathed in the realities of the business and of the advertiser. So it makes it harder, I think, to rock up with those true but dull bits of information because they've got a mental filter that they apply where they go, yeah, but okay, most people in pet food know that, or most people in sales know this. So I should subtract the known things and then see if anything left is interesting. And then you get to Twyman's law, which I'd always talked about this, but have you come across Tony Twyman?
Educate me.
Tony was very much a market researcher. And I think he's got a Wikipedia entry for this where he said something like, if it looks interesting, it's probably wrong. You've probably made a mistake. And that's a good instinct for data people to cultivate. So I haven't even finished the story. So where we overlapped was obviously Google. And I still remember, and we may come back to it, that talk you did and that on understanding auction mechanics and the kind of counterintuitive consequences. And it was just such an exciting thing to listen to and to think about and to see the relationship between the kind of really deep maths of auction theory and the practical consequences. So then Google for a few years, and now past 5 years I've been at ITV. And in a way, they all follow logically, and that my job here is to help TV show up with measurement of business impact in the near term. It's one of the things that the platform products are brilliant at doing, is that we've all met the people. They're built by these very earnest engineers who mostly wouldn't know an advertiser if it came and bit them, but they're good at building these products, and they are
Often fairly hostile to it ads, to be honest.
healthy tension, I think we call it. Yes,
Yeah.
and yet in the marketing world, there's all this sort of stuff about, oh, you're marking your own homework and, oh, you must be doing something malicious or what have you. And just think, no, that's just not how these companies. Yes, Meta has a track record of not being able to add up correctly, which has caused problems on occasion. And I'm not even.
It led to some awkward press conferences.
Yeah.
And hey,
Yeah.
hold on, check. These numbers are a
Yeah.
let's change. We'll send a note. Cheers.
Yes, we'll send a note. We'll do a blog post. We don't need to talk to people. We'll just do a
Yeah.
blog post. Yeah.
Cover that in the blog.
So there's those sorts of things, but even those I think mostly aren't. There's no intention there. I'm not going to go near the wider debate about the role of Meta in society. I don't feel like I'm qualified to talk about that.
And I would say, and this will come across extremely arrogant and wrong, but I will say it anyway. When I'm, especially for people who haven't, like you've intersected at all these different areas on the business, media side, ad tech. When I tell people I both met and know some of the most wonderful people I've ever met through some of the great work at, say, like Google, but I can't tell you how fantastically uneducated and not smart people are
Yeah.
at these places. They don't know. They wouldn't even know. Trust me, they're not nefarious. They don't know how to be nefarious. They don't know much of anything. And it sounds super insulting to say that, but there's just so much more of this is all so much bigger and more complicated than being a great technologist is great. Being a great engineer is great. Building great tech, all these are wonderful tools. It does not make you in any way a pricing, a marketing, and advertising, a business strategist. It doesn't make it that at all. And yeah, certainly it's possible. And you mentioned the Meta case, and they're funny to laugh about these things. These are always mistakes
Yeah.
that are just so incredibly bad that they're funny and can only be interpreted as, oh my gosh, they must be trying to pull one over. And the reality is almost always worse, where it's, no, honestly, it's just not that as buttoned up as you think it is. And that's just the truth.
I know Nakbar, who still does a European data science role, and I think he was behind the early version of Meridian before it got taken on by even more serious technologists. And Dirk is utterly guileless. He would rather just wipe his entire laptop than do anything nefarious. Now, that is not to say that in the hands of salespeople, that Meridian isn't a powerful way of influencing market mix models. And we should talk about this, I think, because it is the way that has become this kind of battleground is fascinating. And
I didn't expect, obviously, you know that, I mean, I do marketing measurement now, but I like every morning is a new package for me. I didn't realize so many people thought the enemy was each other's measurement approaches until apparently becoming in the industry now. And it is amazing to watch the tribal warfare. And sometimes I try to raise my hand from time to time and say, hey, I just want to be very clear. This is all fascinating and all for us, but you realize no one knows or cares about anything that you're talking about. In terms of we're hovering on the fringes of the theory. We're not like, can we just be reminded that people might like watching this as theater, but they're not helped by you guys arguing these details. They're helped by doing things that move the needle. And can we maybe just agree that as long as we're all trying to move the needle, we're probably doing good work? But if we're not trying to move the needle, and this isn't me to like accuse individual companies or people, but I feel like that's the bigger issue is when you start getting into these other, I would call them pedantic arguments, but other people would call them take them very seriously. And I think there's others I've seen, by the way.
Yeah.
Who knew? I guess I know now based on how people have used attribution, why people don't like attribution. But I find it fascinating, the vitriol that comes out against people who can like look at, have data on something and get an insight out of it. I don't know. I don't know where you want to begin on this. I was way back before you talked about when we worked together at Google. I wanted to throw in one other thing, which was you mentioned that you didn't know what they called us in the States. They called us analytical leads. And I think our mutual friend, Greg King, you might remember Greg. So Greg and I used to love to joke. We call us analytical leads because analytical is not an English word. And it was the only way they knew that the data team needed to be important, but they didn't know how to like unofficially slide us. So they gave us a title that it wasn't a word.
Yes, dear. I'm trying to think there's bits I probably can't talk about. We have that same sense of I signed something and it sounded quite scary at the time. It's probably stuff I can talk about, and the stuff that maybe I'll just skip over for now.
Yeah, they've done a good job here. They've done a good job here for the most part. You don't have to worry too much about this, that, or whatever on former agreements based on, I think California said they're not going to enforce any of that stuff, but it doesn't matter. I've got nothing bad to say. It's just,
no, as you say, and I think this is where it goes, is exactly to your point. Let's think about the poor marketers in all of this.
Yeah.
They don't want to listen to and adjudicate endless debates amongst different measurement people about different measurement techniques. They don't have that much time. They're trying to help the business grow or at least not die. And they want to know what they could be doing better. Those are all reasonable things to ask and to want. And it's what I love about what you're doing is that you're very much anchored in that kind of practice. It's back to this practical thing of, have you discovered something that rigorously means I should be doing something differently? Now, it might not be the nth degree of rigor, but it's enough. And is it taking into account all of the things that might cause me to make a mistake? Yes. Okay, great. So let's do that thing differently, and then let's observe and let's learn. And the lovely thing is that we can experiment with these things now much more easily than we could. The biggest break on experimentation, I think, is the advertiser. And we can iterate on these things and try. Where, I suppose, just to finish off on this is the longest introduction ever. I haven't.
Just get to our first question.
So the ITV work is, I suppose, it springboards off to another one of these measurement debates. There's a lot of people in telling you, oh, you have to think about the long term. And you have to think about the benefits that keep accruing to your business over months and maybe even years. And you just need to go and tell finance that. Yeah, tried that, and they cut my budget. Didn't work out so well.
Did they get to use the future money in the W-2?
Yeah, yes, that's right. Where is it? Is it in my bank
money
account?
in your paycheck? Yeah.
And even things like we've talked, you can use discounted cash flow models, and that's okay because finance people understand that. Yes, but for things like recurring revenue, not for something that you're essentially proposing as an article of faith.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The credibility with finance, the issue with marketing, we do this, I'll just editorialize and make your introduction even longer here for a second. I perceive a lot of what the knowledge is being shared about how marketers can be more literate with finance. It's like, you can sum it up as to say, hey, marketers, there's such a thing as finance. Read these finance books, learn these finance terms, then finance people will like you. And as long as they like you, they'll do what you ask. And I'm sure the finance people appreciate that you've learned about their culture, their customs. It's beautiful, I would say, cultural exchange, but I'm not sure they're going to feel any more confident about what they're trying to get through to you is that there's only one thing that, like, you exist for one purpose, that is to have this business be bigger than it used to be. And all of the method and by the way, once you do break through the barrier with a finance person, they will eventually admit that they don't have the first clue about how to help grow that business. They know marketing's hard. That's why they got the heck out of that a long time ago. So they're willing to let you pretty much do everything, but if you can't, like, have a real conversation about ultimately we need to move these things in a certain period of time from a practical perspective, they find it, like, spacious, right? Like, it's very tough to get. It doesn't matter if you change the ROAS number to adjusted for free cash flow or what, however you want to account. It's you're putting my clothes on, but you don't know how to do what I'm trying to do here. And I don't think it's bad to be literate. I just don't think that's the point. That's not what finance people are asking you to do. They're okay translating for you. They just want you to understand the problem.
Yes. Yes. Cosplaying a finance person is not a strategy.
It's maybe not the way to get chummy.
So there's the way that the evidence shows up in finance, and TV has historically just not showed up. And so the work that we're doing is about saying that, yes, it is true that TV in the very short term, if you're looking at a single metric, does not pay back. In a lot of cases. Typically, we're talking about MMMs. Most people who work in CPG, for example, have had the experience of going to a market mix debrief, and then the modeler will say, yes, so the return is 0.7, so that's good. At which point the new marketer says, hang on a minute, that's less than 1, so doesn't that mean I lost money? Oh, yes, it's all right, but we just multiply it by 3. Sorry, what?
Walking back there.
It's an industry norm. We take all this long-term stuff and we just bring it in. Is it any wonder that the finance people are not giving you time in their diary, and don't want to talk to you, if you're doing things like that? And so you've got that tension, which is that if we go too short-term, then the medium looks bad. And obviously I sit in the medium, and whilst I am very keen to be dispassionate, that is something I need to think about. But then in the long term, we're all dead, as Kane said, and we can't just let it run on. So where we're headed, I think, is this kind of near-term incrementality piece. And I think that's where you got the platforms as climbing out of the bottom of the funnel, if you like, and
Mhm.
away from attribution and away towards automation, which frankly, in some cases, has a better understanding of people than the people do. And we should definitely talk about that because that is fascinating. And with telly, what we're trying to do is say, okay, we'll show you how TV shows up in the near term and we'll show you across multiple metrics because it's the kind of medium that causes lots of ripples in different areas. And so our thesis is if we can measure those ripples in a scalable way rather than just measure the audience, then we can help the marketers because then it's a fairer debate, if you like, about okay, where is the value creation happening for my business from marketing, and therefore which bits of marketing should I spend more or less money on? And I probably would say, having said everything about the platforms not being malign in measurement products, I probably would say that certainly in the UK, things have maybe gone too far the other way. In that, if you said, I don't have really good evidence for this, but if I had to guess, I would say that the share of money going to different media channels in the UK isn't aligned to the share of value creation. And so getting to a point where we can all have conversations about that is about telly showing up rather than just lecturing people harder about why they're wrong and why
Yeah.
they need to think about the long term and just telling marketers that they're doing it wrong. I just think is so arrogant and so unhelpful when they are just trying to keep things going in a difficult business climate because it always is and has been for
Hmm.
100 years. And it's just not helpful. So the thesis of what we're doing is to try and meet them more than halfway. And so far it's going quite well. And we've managed to get all the UK broadcasters to talk to each other
Yeah.
and agree that this is what we need to do. Because in the past, the deal was very different. The deal was that we would pay as the broadcasters for the audience measurement, and then you as the advertiser would that would be your problem to figure out the relationship between the reach of an audience and the business impact. And if you want to pay a market mix modeling person to do that, great, but not our problem. We sold you a bag of eyeballs. That sounds slightly gruesome, doesn't it? And whether those eyeballs do anything for your business is entirely your problem. And I just don't think that's okay anymore. And luckily, my boss and my boss's boss and a lot of people in the UK industry also think that now. We've
Mhm.
got quite a good mandate for change, which is exciting.
Effective, like if you get it right, if you're not Sameer, who I would very much trust, but really anybody in this position, right? If you're a measurement or data resource and you are like in the field, you're either at the agency world or in the advertising channel space. If you're doing it right, it means that if they listen, your clients do better, they grow, you're going to get more ad dollars. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned our time together. I like when I was at Google, when we first met, when I was doing that course, I don't think I ever told you this. Little my participation in that entire process, I won't get into my own personal career existential things, but there were basically it was this, hey, I had some time on my hands, or they were kind of looking at me to do something with some time that I had on my hands. And so I was like, I have this thing that keeps happening on the parts of the business that I've been a part of, which is the closer we get down to what the truth is and we get some not trivia but something useful in front of some people and they do an action on it, turns out they always get really happy and their numbers, like the clients, have done a lot better. I've been on these teams repeatedly. The techniques I'm not hearing about here at Google, I'm not hearing people talk about the way we've gone about it. I don't know if I'm doing it right or if I'm following the
Yeah.
playbook or whatever, but I feel like I want to tell someone about this idea that it turns out if they do better, I keep my bonuses are really good. Like I've been doing really well in my numbers. And so that's a more winding way to tell the story. But that's how I got even interested in even sharing anything in the first place. So and I was maybe blessed from that outsider perspective of, now technically my first job was in marketing, if we want to go way back to when I worked in education. But ultimately, my introduction to this space was really that experience at Google. And so I hadn't had a lot of preconceived notions about how stuff should work. I knew what I was trained to see. I was told to think about it. But beyond that, I didn't really have a lot of, I wasn't the most well-read marketing econometric person. I know I hadn't built up that repository of insight and weirdly, and I would almost encourage everyone, this is not on topic, but I would say if you feel like a imposter or an outsider in any role, just realize that it gives you a bit of a superpower of you're just
Yeah.
able to ask questions that everyone else would be too stupid to ask. But I had that on my side for so long. And
And I would say the education element, I didn't know that about you, but that
yeah.
I still remember you guiding us through that material. And there was one thing you said, and I probably say this to people most months, if not most weeks at ITV, which is you've got to remember that the sort of the spectrum of price is completely flipped. You said something like the first click you buy will be the cheapest you'll ever buy. And at the time, my head just did somersaults. I wait, what? Hang on, how? Why would that? Oh, okay. And then the next one and the next one. Eventually, you hit diminishing returns, which
Yeah.
is the complete reverse of the way that a reach-based medium thinks about this. If you go on to our buying platform for ITVX, thing called Planet V, and if you tick all the boxes, I want left-handed golfers who eat fish on a Friday and like soft cheese, whatever. I don't know. There's a million and
Yeah.
one things you could pick. You get it all the way down to one person that you're targeting. That will be an incredibly expensive impression because, from our point of view, because we've sold everyone and then gone narrow by exception, and because audiences in many ways are not. This is an awful thing you have to tell audience measurement people. Yeah, you think that that everyone's using your currency because it's true. No, they're not. They're
Yeah.
in the broadcaster case. We're using it for price discrimination. You want to be in the football? Great. You've got to be targeting 16-24.
Yeah.
But other people watch the football. Yeah, we know, but whatever. That's what you got to do because that attracts a higher price. So it's
Yep.
a way of kind of managing demand. And for us, targeting therefore is the more targeted you go, the more expensive you get. I keep saying in an auction world or in a kind of incrementality world, you've got to flip your mental model because you start when the machinery starts to work. The first people you get are the easiest people, and then it gets harder. And that is a
Remember too on the auction, any system where prediction is going on, which is like a digital
yeah,
click-based system, right? There, it's not to say that first impression didn't cost a lot. It's that remember they can pay you in intent. And that's what you can't. You're intervening on TV. You can't. The 18 to 24-year-old person can't pay you in their interests. But that's absolutely what you can do. That's exactly how it works, right? On
yeah,
the digital auctions, right? They're paying you with oh yeah, that is nice. I'll click on that. Okay. I earned my first, as you mentioned, my first click, which is often, yes, the cheapest you'll ever buy. Fascinating. Yeah. I love it. It's great for me to hear too, because I think I'm sure all of us who've seen different parts of the ecosystem wonder, how does this part of marketing think about this? Or, oh, here's this insider on price or value or demand. They're getting this, but they're not getting that. Like, why don't they get that? And I think you bring up a great point of these things are different. There's very different dynamics.
yeah.
You could bring the same information to an audience, and depending on how they're trained to think about it or they have to think about it, it might mean very different things. So it's never wrong to take a step back and say, okay, let me unpack. Why is this a recommendation? Another thing you said earlier, I just want to get to this before I forget because I keep
Mm,
putting a pin in it. I love your point about not lecturing to marketers or like this idea that if we're really going to move the needle, it's probably not the approach. Honestly, so at Bonsai, I like to say we're in bed with business, not with advertising. And so the bad part about that, right, is that, well, to be, if doing this is as hard as we all say it is, and marketing is extremely hard, that by definition, most things can't work.
yeah, yes.
It
If it
can't
was
be
easy,
true that
you would be doing
everything
it.
you're
Yeah,
trying is doing
yeah,
great, and this is also the hardest thing anyone can do. And so now when you put the data in that way, what could it look like? It can look very much, oh, there's a company out there that just tells me everything I do is wrong. And that not popular. And I think about that all the time of that's not what we're trying to do at Bonsai. That's also not what I think anyone with truth at the core of what they're doing in data is trying to do. But oftentimes telling the truth
yeah,
means making this story feel like we're telling this like combative story. And I think we still struggle with how to do this well, but I think the intent of showing more truth is to not talk about all the 80% of the things that are failing because no, dude, you're fine. No one cares. 80% of stuff will be not work how
yeah,
you want, but it needs to be a bigger deal when something works. It needs to be a bigger deal when something works. It needs to be a bigger deal when you're, say, your case, when your ITV's advertisers are seeing business growth. It needs to not just be like, oh, okay, that's great. 10 people said that everything worked last month, so put another one in the list. Add a little 5% to the budget, right? No, you're going to lose the thread here. Now that means like making it, how do you make these real wins more differentiated? That means you have to have a more honest perspective on what's really going on. And so I always say, I judge anyone, in the space, not on the degree and statistics that they have or in the method they use for prediction, but the intent behind it. Is are you trying to tell them the truth or are you trying to tell them a story? And if you're trying to tell them a story that starts with, I want to tell you something good, it's tough for me to get on board with that. Not because I don't love good stories, but because I know you're going to hide something they need to hear.
Yeah. No, I think that's very, and that was an interesting element. I have to say that the sales team at ITV, you would think, fairly traditional TV sales team, would not be supportive.